The New Orleans Saints are finally getting healthy and trying to get back in the win column.
And the Los Angeles Chargers are hoping they can get back Joey Bosa and DJ Chark to spark something on offense.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome into this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Chargers and Locked On Saints. We are your hosts, David Drugmeyer, over at Locked On Chargers, co-host over there, along with the one, the only Daniel Wade. Those guys breaking down the Chargers every single Monday through Friday, have been at it for years. Myself, Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast, as well as beat writer for the Saints over at LouisianaSports.net, Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode, this crossover Thursday, we're going to be breaking down the Los Angeles Chargers and New Orleans Saints matchup. We'll take a look at what each team needs to do to get a victory. We'll break down the Chargers getting some big pieces back as they try to spark their offense again, and the New Orleans Saints simply trying to get back into the win column, and health there finally trending in the right direction as well. We appreciate you very much for being an everydayer and for making us your first listen on Locked On Chargers and on Locked On Saints. Here, both a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode, this crossover Thursday, brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDON NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. David, this game is all about health for both of these teams. That has to be kind of the headline in this one.
It really is. I mean, both of these teams have dealt with such, not just a lot of injuries, but injuries to super important players on both sides of the football. And hey, every single team deals with it every year. And it's how well you're able to deal with those injuries and stay afloat and really kind of see the quality of your depth shine through is who separates the winners from the losers when you're dealing with those injuries.
Well, the New Orleans Saints are hard to keep out of the loser category here with a 5-game losing streak, and a lot because of those injuries. I think there's some coaching concerns, things like that, of course, as well. We'll get to all of that today. I will say that New Orleans sports injuries just don't stop. The same day that the New Orleans Saints start to get healthier, the New Orleans Pelicans tip off their season, and the newly acquired point guard DeJounte Murray fractures his left hand. Welcome to New Orleans, everybody.
Gosh.
Sorry, this stinks. Health in New Orleans sports is much like potholes all over the street, ever present, ever present. So for the Saints, look, the Saints right now getting healthier. This was the least amount of DNPs, or did not participate, players that they had on their injury report. I think this is actually the first time since week 1 that they were actually outnumbered when it came to the injury report, with more on the Chargers than there were on the Saints. The only 2 players not participating in practice for New Orleans were quarterback Derek Carr, as well as backup offensive lineman Nick Saldiveri. A lot of other key pieces coming back: tight end Taysom Hill, offensive lineman Cesar Ruiz. We saw, guys like Lucas Patrick back out there this week. Chris Olave is working his way back through concussion protocol, the starting wide receiver, all that. That is kind of the biggest thing. But the biggest question mark is, can that helpful trend of health end up actually helping the New Orleans Saints win a game? That's got to be the biggest story for them, especially over in the offensive side.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you're looking at the New Orleans Saints and kind of their offense, it's definitely been a little bit of a struggle. I mean, they've had a couple of guys that have tried to kind of carry the load a little bit. A guy who just got rewarded with a new contract with Alvin Kamara. That's got to be kind of a cool situation there. A guy who's been a long time New Orleans Saint and finally kind of gets his kind of just reward after dealing with some injuries and being able to come back and look like his old self. Like he is a very, very dangerous member of that New Orleans Saints offense, and a guy who, when you're getting more help on that offensive line, only makes a guy who's extremely dangerous and very patient that much more of a concern when you're playing the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah. He's not a yards before contact kind of guy. He's a yards after contact kind of guy. You got to get him into that space, though. And hard to do that when you don't
trying to get the contact. That's the big problem.
Yeah, right. And then when you don't have those offensive linemen that are hustling 40 yards downfield with them and all that, like you see from Cesar Ruiz and Eric McCoy, some guys that start on their offensive line, that ends up making a big difference. So you're absolutely right. That's big for them. Meanwhile, over on the defensive side, I think the biggest thing is that the team's defensive efforts have not led to greater execution. And to me, that's a coaching thing. And that's big because your head coach is the defensive mastermind. Like, that's his side of the football. I'm sure that you've had this conversation before with the Brandon Staley type of situation. So I'm really interested in kind of your perspective on when you have a defensive head coach and your defense can't tackle.
Well, basically, after Brandon Staley and that failed experiment, I have no interest whatsoever in having any kind of head coach be a play caller from either side of the ball. I'm in firm belief that your coach needs to be the CEO of the organization. He needs to oversee everything. I think we saw when Brandon Staley was the head coach and the defensive coordinator that there was too much on his plate. And I think it showed with how bad the defense was. He came in coaching the Chargers after authoring the number one defense in the NFL with the Rams. And we did not see that for maybe spare a couple of games throughout 3.5 seasons with the Chargers as the head coach. You know, as far as the defensive metrics were all towards the bottom of the league. And of course, now with Jesse Minter, who is just the defensive coordinator for the Chargers, they have the number one defense in the NFL by points per game allowed. So obviously that helps vindicate my opinion, but also I think a lot of Charger fans would agree they don't want any part of anyone being a coordinator / head coach. They just want one guy overseeing everything.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's an interesting perspective that I don't think is discussed much here in New Orleans because of the success of Sean Payton as a head coach play caller. I think that kind of skews the perspective there a bit, right? And then you had the original success of Dennis Allen as a head coach and defensive play caller, but now you're starting to see things kind of teeter away there. So it is a really interesting perspective. It's why I wanted to hear your thoughts on it, because I don't think it's a conversation that we have much here in New Orleans because we've seen the success there, but you're not always going to have the success when it comes to that. So I'll be very interested to see if things don't improve for the Saints, they do make a change at head coach, how they end up going about that, if they want the offensive play caller, if they want the defensive play caller, or if they just want the ex-special teams coach that can rah-rah everybody and be the CEO. I love a good special teams head coach. Bill Belichick, we've seen it with some of the best in the league. Obviously, I pulled the best name possible when I say that. Obviously, there are others as well. But, I mean, we saw like Rich Bisaccia and what he did with the Raiders the year when he kind of got the opportunity. He should have had more than an opportunity than he got. But
a cup of coffee, really.
Yeah, really. And so I'm all about those types of that type of conversation as well. Is a really interesting one. But look, the Saints tackling has been a bit of an issue for them, and they specifically need to tighten up against the run defense in particular, because while the Chargers might not be the most, I'll throw air quotes up when I say most successful. I'm not saying that they're not successful, but most successful run team from a yards per game basis. They love to run the ball and they're committed to it. That feels like the mark of a Jim Harbaugh coach team right there.
You better believe it. They definitely want to run the ball. It's not just Jim Harbaugh with the physicality and wanting to establish the line of scrimmage. It's Greg Roman as well, right?
Yeah,
and Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh have been Batman and Robin for a very, very long time at multiple different stops, whether it's Stanford, whether it's the 49ers, or whether it's here with the Chargers, teamed up and united once again. They want to establish the running game, but the last 3 games, they are only averaging about 80 yards on the ground per contest, which is in stark contrast to the first game of the season where they were running wild all over the Raiders and their run defense. And in a lot of their wins, the Chargers have been able to run the ball, been able to control the clock, been able to keep the opposing offense off the field, and been able to set up manageable down and distance situations for Justin Herbert, which is kind of what they want. The whole, I guess, selling point in the offseason was, hey, guess what Justin Herbert would look like if he had a great defense and a running game? Well, guess what? That running game has been very Jekyll or Hyde. It's either been there or it has not been there at all. And when it hasn't, the Chargers lose.
Yeah, so that's going to be a big key in this one. We'll get to some of those things that the Saints and Chargers each need to do to win this game here in a little bit. I want to mention starting linebacker Demario Davis really refuting the idea that there's been no effort for the New Orleans Saints defense. I tend to agree with him. I think it's been more of the execution issues, and that's going to be put to the test big time up against Los Angeles Chargers and their run game. But coming up next, we're going to dive into a little bit more on the Los Angeles Chargers offense and defense, because not only are they looking for a spark through their run game, they might have a spark in their passing game coming back this week and an even bigger spark on their defense. Let's break that all down here as we continue on with this crossover Thursday edition, Locked on Chargers, Locked on Saints, part of Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of this crossover Thursday is brought to you by our friends over at ZBiotics. You provide the absolute best pre-alcohol drink you're going to find. Ross, what's a pre-alcohol drink? Let me tell you more about it. You know, those nights where you just want to go out, you want to have a good time, you want to enjoy yourself with some friends, but you have a big meeting or a big presentation the next morning, or maybe you got to record a podcast, like whatever it might be out there. You want to make sure that you're in good shape that next morning. Well, that's where pre-alcohol by ZBiotics comes into play. Here's how it works. You drink the pre-alcohol. So for best results, you drink it before you have your first drink of the night. All right. Very important. Drink that before you have your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly that evening, and then enjoy the next day. It's that simple. I absolutely love it. I've got some. I love to make sure that I'm ready to go the next day when I do have an event or something like that. I had an event last night, and here I am recording a podcast the next morning, and I'm doing great. Even if you don't believe me, I don't care. I'm doing great. So go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off of your first order when you use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout. ZBiotics is backed by a 100% money-back guarantee. If you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund you your money, no questions asked. Remember to head over to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use that code LockedOnNFL for 15% off at checkout. All right, everybody, continuing on with this crossover Thursday. You're Locked on Chargers, Locked on Saints. Diving now into a little bit more around the Chargers, because we talked about the run game in particular, but let's take a look at the passing game now for the Chargers, because it sounds like they might be getting a key player back that might give a little bit of a spark to that passing game.
A much needed spark indeed. I think after the last game against the Arizona Cardinals on Monday Night Football, I put a tweet out saying the Chargers need to trade for a number one wide receiver tonight. I was very, very frustrated that the leading receiver in that game was blocking tight end Will Dissly. He had his best game of the entire season, but that was a byproduct of the lack of talent on the outside. Probably without, including Ladd McConkey in that, because Ladd McConkey was fantastic, but Ladd McConkey was beat up. He played hurt. It showed. He did his best. He absolutely was out there battling, but the Chargers were in desperate need of some reinforcements, and a guy that they had brought in, one of those contracts where you wanted to give somebody a second chance, a new, fresh opportunity. That was DJ Chark. And DJ Chark, unfortunately, got hurt and has been on IR for the entire season up to this point, but they activated his 21-day window last week, and they kind of ramped him up slowly. He was questionable to play on Monday. I think that ramp up continues this week, where he finally gets to that runway and is able to take off, and not a minute too soon, because the Chargers had Quentin Johnston that didn't practice, Ladd McConkey that didn't practice. Right. They had Darius Davis that did not practice on Wednesday. So they desperately need somebody to come in and inject some life, some speed, and DJ Chark absolutely has that. He's a true 4-3 guy. He's a guy that can stretch the field. He's a good contested catch wide receiver, and he's a guy that I think really will add an element to this Chargers offense that has been desperately lacking, and that's the ability to threaten the defense to go deep, somebody they have to respect.
Yeah, Saints fans will recognize a couple of things from this. First of all, yet another wide receiver that ends up coming back up against the New Orleans Saints. This always seems to happen, David. It's always against the Saints that these wide receivers typically end up coming back. And then, of course, the idea of a 4-3, big-bodied wide receiver that can help you stretch the field. The Saints just invested in one of their own, in Marquez Valdes-Scantling, after losing Rashid Shaheed for the season. So a lot of Saints fans can understand the importance of a guy like that. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of watch the matchup. Now, the Saints defense has been mostly healthy throughout the season. They did lose towards the end of the game last week, Marshawn Lattimore, their starting corner, with a hamstring injury, but he was a full participant in practice on Wednesday, will be again today, most likely. And so that is going to be kind of the matchup that you're going to be watching, is him and Alontae Taylor, another corner on the outside in base sets, but then Alontae Taylor will move inside in the nickel sets, and then on the outside goes rookie cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry. So a rookie there for
one of the best names
offense.
in the entire NFL.
Fantastic name, one of the best in the NFL, absolutely. But also a rookie for this offense to try to pick on. So give him the opportunity to kind of be able to see, all right, is he ready to be thrown into the fire? He fared well week 2 against the Dallas Cowboys. I'll be interested to see how he fares against the Chargers here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be very, very important, with, Justin Herbert coming off of his best passing contest of the season, threw for 349 yards, but 0 touchdowns. And I think that's been the biggest problem for the Chargers, is their inability to score. They have not scored a touchdown in their last 15 drives, which is disgusting for me to have to say out loud. I really don't want to have to do that, but the facts are the facts. And also, they're not getting to the red zone. And when they get to the red zone, they're not scoring. So it's been really, really bad for the Chargers. They have to get back to running the football. They have to make sure they set up some easy completions for Justin Herbert, so that when they get to the red zone, the play calling, it has to be better. I mean, they have to be able to come up with some plays to be able to feature some guys to get them in the end zone, because Cameron Dicker is fantastic, and he's a kicking machine. He's really one of the best kickers in NFL history for the Chargers. When you look at his accuracy numbers, they're great, but I don't want to be talking about field goals. I want to be talking about touchdowns, and the Chargers just have not been able to generate enough of them.
Yeah, that's huge. The Saints for a little while had what was the top red zone scoring percentage on defense. They sit now at number 3. They were originally at 25% is all that they were allowing when it came to defensive touchdowns allowed. They're still doing well at 41.7% now, third best red zone defense in the NFL. But they were aided by that sort of early and strong start. They've kind of slipped a little bit here lately, but now as the defense gets a little bit healthier with Pete Werner coming back and Khalen Saunders coming back, some important guys in their front 7, maybe they'll be able to kind of get back to where they were. So red zone offense versus red zone defense sounds like a big one to watch when the Chargers have the ball. Let's flip the script over to when the Saints have the ball. The Saints, of course, will have rookie quarterback Spencer Rattler getting his 3rd start here in this game. He's been challenged big time when under pressure, and it sounds like the Chargers might be getting an important pressure player back this week potentially.
Hallelujah. And I think that's a feeling a lot of Charger fans have around this particular player, because it's really, really frustrating to see him not on the football field, because he's still very, very effective when he is on the football field. But that has been the story of his entire career. And of course, Charger fans know who I'm talking about. It is Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa has dealt with a hip injury. He has missed the last 3 games. And yeah, Charger fans understandably have been very frustrated with his inability to stay on the field. But when he's on the field, he's still very, very productive. And their Chargers are not productive without him. The Chargers have only had 5 sacks in the 3 games without Joey Bosa.
Oh, wow.
He had 2 sacks in the 2 full games that he played by himself. Right. And he has, I think, 4 pressures and 40 pass rush snaps. So he's still getting after the quarterback. You look at his run defensive grades, it's in the 90th percentile when you look at PFF. So when he's on the field, he is dominant and still extremely effective. He just has not been able to stay on the field. So he returned to practice in a limited capacity, but that's still a huge improvement over what it has been for Joey, who has been a DNP for the last several weeks. And if he didn't come back this week, it was, why don't you put him on IR? Well, it's probably because he's about to come back, and he desperately is a piece the Chargers need to have on the field, because that was the whole vision when you had Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack both take straight pay cuts to be able to stay with the Chargers and play together. We haven't seen that tandem on the field enough, and the Chargers have paid both those gentlemen a lot of money. Khalil Mack has earned his money. He is the ageless wonder, but Joey Bosa has not earned his money just because of the inability to stay on the field. So Charger fans desperately want him to be on the field for the rest of the season, because if the Chargers want to get where they want to go, and they still have plenty of time to get there, Joey Bosa has to be a part of it on defense.
Yeah, big time. I'm looking at kind of his snap distribution from this year as well as from 2023. Looks like he lines up over the right tackle more times than not. Definitely moves around, but looks like he kind of focuses a little bit more over on that right tackle side. So that's going to put him up against Trevor Penning, New Orleans Saints offensive tackle, who of course just moved over from left tackle. So a pretty big matchup to watch there if Joey Bosa is indeed able to get back out on the field. And of course, that means Khalil Mack with the rookie Taliesin Fuanga, who struggled last week, but has had a really strong start to his rookie season. Quietly one of the better rookies in the NFL on offensive lines. I mean, NFL offensive line rookies. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know why that was tough. Anyway, coming up, we're going to now break it down and take a look at what each of these teams needs to do to win. And I'll tell you right now, for me, it comes all down to protection or disruption of the quarterback. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode, this crossover Thursday, Locked on Chargers, Locked on Saints, part of Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, who is not feeling the New Orleans Saints in this matchup, but is very heavily feeling, despite, David said, 15 drives without a touchdown, feeling the Los Angeles Chargers in this one. The home team favored by 7.5 points with an over-under that's now creeping up. It was at like 36.5. It's now sitting at 40.5. So that eventually got bet up. So take a look at all that. If you want to get in on it, it's all for you there over at FanDuel.com. You can find that. You can also find the NBA, which is now underway. The World Series, of course, which is going on. Go Dodgers, I guess. I don't know. I used to live in Los Angeles, so I guess I'm a lifelong Dodgers fan since like 2020 or something like that. So then you can take a look at that. Tennis, they've got racing, they've got a ton more. So go check it all out today over at FanDuel.com. You get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed if you're a new customer, because when you place your first $5 bet, you'll get that $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, win or lose. Go check them out today, FanDuel.com. All right, everybody, it is time to break down this Los Angeles Chargers New Orleans Saints game with what each team needs to do to get a win. We are proudly presented by our friends over at Prize Picks, as we are every crossover Thursday. Head over, download the Prize Picks app, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. David, let's start off with the home team here when it comes to the Chargers. What are the things that you feel they need to do to get a win in this game?
So yeah, 3 things that the Chargers absolutely must do if they want to win this football game. Starting with the first is avoid the boneheaded mistakes. Then they have to get back to winning in the trenches, and the tackling and the angles have to be better. So avoiding the boneheaded mistakes is really stemming back from the Chargers' loss to the Arizona Cardinals. They fumbled inside the 5-yard line out after a big pass play to Jalen Reagor. He gets stripped. The ball goes into the end zone, and then they lose possession after a very, very promising drive. And then they get an interception by a big man. The defensive lineman, Chark, is able to get a kind of tip pass from Kyler Murray, and then is immediately stripped and then loses the ball and goes right back to the Arizona Cardinals. And then towards the end of the game, rookie cornerback Cam Hart, who has played exceptionally well, being thrust into duty, got a unnecessary roughness penalty on Marvin Harrison Jr. towards the end of that game that really put them in position to be able to glide down the field very effortlessly and score that game-winning field goal. And then get back to winning in the trenches. I talked about it earlier. The Chargers have been very boom or bust when running the ball, but it's also the run defense, which up to this point, at least up to the Arizona Cardinals game, the run defense has been very, very good. I mean, the overall, defense for the Chargers has been fantastic this year under Jesse Minter. But last week, they got bullied. They gave up 181 rushing yards and 6.2 yards per carry, and the Chargers can't allow that. They got to get back to dominating on both sides in the trenches. They have to stop the run, and they have to run the football at a much higher clip. They got to get J.K. Dobbins involved. He's got to get consistent carries, and they have to set themselves up in more manageable down and distance situations. And then the tackling and angles have to be much, much better. I mean, especially when you're going up against Kyler Murray, a running quarterback. He's a guy that destroys angles. And if you don't have the right angle on him, then you get exposed. That's what happened to linebacker Junior Colson. Unfortunately, he was out there on the edge, and Kyler Murray was waving bye-bye, basically, while he was running past him en route to the end zone. So the Chargers have to tackle better, which, normally they swarm to the football, and it's never just one hat. It's multiple hats to the ball. They have to get back to that philosophy if they want to get back into the win column against the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, I think some of those are pretty big for New Orleans as well. We talked about the importance of tackling earlier on. I think both these teams are looking at that over the defensive side. I think for me, the thing that it starts off with is the number one key is protecting Spencer Rattler, but disrupting Justin Herbert. Then I would probably look at the run game, getting the run game back going, and kind of playing keep away a little bit, especially with the sort of dedication to the run game that Los Angeles has. They would have the ability to control this game if they're able to start producing on the ground while also being committed to it. So you want to kind of keep the ball out of their hands in order to make sure that that's not happening. And then the other piece is going to be kind of not necessarily the stop contributing to the other team more than you contribute to yourself, right? It's like the self-inflicted wounds thing that you kind of described earlier. Saints have had their own kind of fair share of that. And I think in order for them to do that, they most effectively, they need to reopen sort of the explosive area of their offense. If they can get back to that, then I think that it allows them to maybe be able to play with a little bit more confidence, a little bit more swagger, all that, especially with a rookie quarterback there. You want to build that confidence as best as you can. And you can build that confidence through the quick, easy passes. But the way that the Saints have gone, 32-yard pass to open up his very first NFL pass off of play action, 27-yard pass to a tight end last week. I believe it was Foster Moreau this past week, Juwan Johnson the week before that, both the tight ends getting involved off the play action, very first play of each of those games. So the Saints have not been afraid to push with that. But a lot of that comes down and comes back to that very first thing about protecting Spencer Rattler, 33.3% completion percentage and a 42.1 passer rating when under pressure so far this season. Those are not great numbers. Now, obviously, being good against pressure is unsustainable. It's not a consistent enough thing for you to hang a hat on. So you got to keep them clean no matter what, right? You don't want a quarterback that only plays well under pressure because there's no guarantee that that's going to happen.
And it means they're constantly under pressure, which is not good.
Right, exactly. And so you want to make sure you're cleaning that up. So the Saints maybe getting a little bit of their health back on the offensive line can help them with that. But at the same time, you want to disrupt and get after Justin Herbert as much as you can, because he has struggled a bit under pressure so far this season as well. So do you have the ability to be able to kind of make things tough for him? 52.1% completion percentage, 62.1 passer rating there. Not the same as what we've seen with Spencer Rattler, but Spencer Rattler is also a rookie quarterback, so you would expect those numbers to be worse. So if you can get after Justin Herbert, keep Spencer Rattler clean, I think that ends up kind of moving the needle for you. Get Alvin Kamara and his. Oh, go ahead. You were going to add something.
I was just going to say, I mean, for Spencer Rattler and the offensive line, they're probably getting Chris Olave back, and obviously Chris Olave is a big downfield threat. And so if they are able to protect, then they can possibly get the ball in the waiting hands of Chris Olave and that offense.
Exactly right. So I'll jump to my third one, which was the explosive plays. Chris Olave has got to be a big part of that, right? I mean, the biggest days that he's had so far this season have been 86 yards, 87 yards, things like that. He hasn't had that century mark game yet. And of course, he missed the last couple effectively because he ended up having to leave the game 2 plays in 2 weeks ago with a concussion against the Bucks, and then missed the tight Thursday night turnaround to the Denver Broncos after that. So now you get him back, hopefully, right? That's the expectation at least. And then he has to be a big part of that. Maybe Marquez Valdez-Scantling is able to contribute to that as well. But you really want Chris Olave to be that guy, about half the percent of drops in his career, things like that. You really want Chris Olave to be that guy. And then getting the run game going on the offensive side, just like nothing helps your quarterback than having a good defense and a good run game, just like we talked about with Greg Roman and just like we talked about with Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert. You definitely want that to get going. New offensive coordinator for the New Orleans Saints, Clint Kubiak. He loves to establish the run game first and be able to build off of that. When the Saints have not been able to establish their run game, they have not been able to build anything elsewhere. They have no second punch so far this season. So they've got to be able to get that run game going to be able to support.
And I'm going to tell you right now, when Alvin Kamara is at his best, he is one of the most frustrating running backs in the league to have to tackle and to have to defend, because it looks like he's just walking
Literally
at a nice brisk little the Olympic speed when they're doing their speed walking. And yet he's not. He's running extremely fast, but he allows that patience to set up blocks, which allows him to get those explosive plays, which is a nightmare for any defense, especially a Chargers defense that, has been very good, but has given up a couple of explosive plays. So they just have to try to control and bottle up Alvin Kamara, which is obviously much easier said than done.
The run game, the quarterback, the explosive plays, the pass rush, the tackling, it's all here in this matchup. The coaching, it's all here in this matchup, or at least the coaching under a magnifying glass for the New Orleans Saints. But still, it's all in this matchup. I cannot wait for this one, man. This is going to be a lot of fun. We'll see which one of these teams ends up coming out on top and maybe riding the ship a bit for the season. It's an important game for both teams. I wouldn't say must win, but certainly an important game for most of these teams. That's David Drugmeyer, everybody. Locked On Chargers. You can find him and Daniel Wade every single Monday through Friday and more over at Locked On Chargers. Myself, Ross Jackson. You can find me every day over at Locked On Saints, breaking down your favorite teams here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now go and check out Locked On NFL as well. Get all the biggest stories from around the National Football League, 2 episodes per day over there. Make sure you go and get that. And of course, make sure you check back in on Friday with Locked On Chargers and Locked On Saints to get the rest of the preview for this big time matchup. We appreciate you very much for being here. We'll see you again here soon on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.